My name is Jake. I've been an addict for as long as I can remember. Not in years, maybe, but in my mind it feels like forever. Addiction takes over like that. Quietly, then all at once. It starts with little things, choices you think you can control. Before you know it, you've lost everything that ever mattered to you. And the worst part? You barely realize it's happening until it's too late. I wasn't always this way. If you met me years ago, you'd think I had it together. I wasn't perfect, sure, but I had dreams, goals, people who cared about me. My mom used to say I was the kind of kid who lit up a room. I don't know when that light went out, but somewhere along the way it did. And when it did, I stopped caring about my family, my friends, and eventually myself. It started small, as these things always do. I'd tell myself it wasn't a big deal. I'm just having fun, I'd say. I can stop anytime I want. At first I believed it. Then I said it so much I stopped believing it, but I kept saying it anyway. It was easier than facing the truth. I told myself a lot of lies back then. Lies to get me through the day. Lies to make the guilt hurt less. But deep down I knew. I always knew. You might be wondering how I got here. Honestly, so am I. There wasn't one big moment, no single event that pushed me into the life I was living. It was more like 1,000 small decisions, a slow decline that I didn't notice until I was at the bottom looking up. It's funny in a twisted way, how you can fool yourself into thinking you're in control when everything around you is falling apart. The first time I realized I might have a problem, I brushed it off. I'd been on a bender for days, locked in my apartment with the blinds shut tight. I don't even remember why I started. Maybe it was stress, maybe boredom, maybe nothing at all. But by the time the haze lifted, I looked around and saw the mess I'd made. Bottles, wrappers, broken furniture, the kind of destruction that doesn't happen overnight. I told myself I'd clean up, get back on track, but I didn't. I couldn't. The people around me started to notice, of course. My mom would call, leaving voicemails asking where I was, if I was okay. I stopped answering. What was I supposed to say? That her son, the one she always believed in, was slowly destroying himself. My friends drifted away one by one. I don't blame them. I wasn't the kind of person you wanted to be around anymore. I'd become someone else, someone who lied, manipulated, and took without giving anything back. Someone I didn't even recognize. And yet, I kept going. It wasn't about fun anymore. It wasn't even about feeling good. It was just about feeling something, anything. When you've been numb for as long as I was, even pain feels like a kind of relief. I know that doesn't make sense, but that's the reality of it. It's not rational. Addiction doesn't care about reason or logic. It's a trap, and once you're in, it feels impossible to climb out. There were moments, though, brief flashes of clarity where I'd think, this isn't who I want to be. This isn't my life. But those moments were always fleeting, drowned out by the pull of whatever it was I thought I needed. I remember one night, standing in front of a mirror. I barely recognized the person staring back at me. My eyes were hollow, my skin pale, my body a shadow of what it used to be. I told myself I'd get better, that tomorrow I'd wake up and fix everything. But tomorrow always came, and nothing ever changed. Eventually, the days started blending together. I stopped keeping track of time, hours, days, weeks. It all felt the same. I'd wake up, go through the motions, and fall back into the same cycle. It was like living the same nightmare over and over. And no matter what I did, I couldn't wake up. I didn't even want to, not really. Because waking up meant facing what I'd done. And I didn't think I could handle that. The worst part wasn't the physical toll, though that was bad enough. It was the emptiness. The sense that no matter what I did, I was too far gone. I'd burned too many bridges, told too many lies, hurt too many people. I was convinced that if anyone saw the real me, they'd walk away just like everyone else had. So I kept it hidden, buried beneath layers of denial and excuses. I told myself I didn't need anyone, but the truth was, I needed someone, anyone, to tell me I wasn't alone. I just didn't know how to ask for help. And then came the night that changed everything. I'd been using for days, locked in that same apartment, surrounded by the same mess. My body felt like it was shutting down, but I didn't care. I just wanted to escape, to forget. I don't remember much about what happened next. There are flashes, blinding pain, a sense of panic, then nothing, just blackness. When I woke up, I wasn't in my apartment anymore. I wasn't anywhere I recognized. And that's when I realized something was very, very wrong. When I opened my eyes, I expected to see the familiar chaos of my apartment. The bottles scattered on the floor, the dim light fighting through the blinds, the suffocating mess that had become my life. But that's not what I saw. At first, I wasn't sure if my eyes were even open. The world around me wasn't dark, but it wasn't light either. It was something else entirely, something I can't fully describe. Everything seemed to glow, but not in the way a light bulb glows. It was softer, almost like the air itself was alive with warmth and energy. Colors shimmered around me, but they weren't like any colors I'd ever seen before. They were deeper, richer, more vivid, as if the world was made from something purer than anything back home. I tried to move, but I couldn't feel my body. I didn't feel pain or numbness. I just didn't feel. It was like my physical self didn't exist anymore. But somehow I was still me. I could think. I could see. I could sense everything around me in a way that was completely new, yet strangely familiar, like I'd been here before, but I couldn't remember when. I wasn't scared. That's what surprised me the most. You'd think waking up in a place like this without any idea how you got there would fill you with panic, but instead, I felt calm, peaceful even. It was like all the noise that had been drowning me for years, the guilt, the shame, the fear had just stopped. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I could breathe. The air around me felt alive, too. It wasn't heavy or thin, it was perfect, like it was designed to sustain you. I didn't feel hunger, thirst, or exhaustion. It was as if every need I'd ever had was already met. And the silence, it wasn't really silent. It was more like a hum, a soft vibration that seemed to resonate from everywhere and nowhere all at once. It wasn't just in my ears. I could feel it in my very being. It was comforting, like a melody I'd always known but never paid attention to. As I looked around, I realized there was no clear ground or sky, no walls or edges. The space stretched endlessly in every direction, yet I didn't feel lost. It was warm and inviting, as if it was holding me, keeping me safe. The air shimmered, and shapes seemed to flicker at the edges of my vision, but when I tried to focus on them, they vanished. It was surreal, yet I felt like I belonged there, like this place had been waiting for me. And then I sensed it. Something, or someone, was nearby. At first, it was just a feeling, a presence that seemed to ripple through the air. It wasn't threatening or intimidating. It was the opposite. It felt kind, loving, like every good thing I'd ever experienced in my life was concentrated into this one sensation. As the presence grew closer, I felt a wave of emotions wash over me. Relief, joy, gratitude. I didn't understand it, but I didn't question it either. It was like this presence knew me, knew everything about me, and still accepted me without hesitation. That alone was enough to bring me to the verge of tears, if I'd still had a body that could cry. I couldn't see it at first. It was just light, brighter than anything around me, but not blinding. It moved toward me slowly, deliberately, and with each step, or maybe it wasn't steps, I don't know, the peace I felt deepened. My mind raced with questions. Where am I? What is this? Who or what is coming toward me? But even as those questions filled my mind, I felt no urgency to find answers. I just knew that whatever or whoever it was, I could trust it completely. And then I saw it. The light began to shift, taking form. It wasn't like seeing someone step out of the shadows or watching a figure appear from a distance. It was more like the light itself was becoming a shape, a person. The glow didn't fade, but it softened, and slowly I began to see a figure emerge from within it. I couldn't make out every detail, but the presence was unmistakable. There was something about this figure, something so familiar, so powerful, and so overwhelmingly good that it made my very soul tremble. I wanted to speak, to ask who they were, but I couldn't. Words didn't feel necessary. It was as if they already knew everything I was thinking, everything I'd ever thought, and still, they came closer. As they drew nearer, the air seemed to grow even warmer, filled with something I can only describe as love. Pure, unconditional love. The kind of love that doesn't demand anything in return, the kind that sees you at your worst and embraces you anyway. It was overwhelming, but not in a way that made me want to run. If anything, I wanted to move closer, to be near them, to stay in their presence forever. The figure stopped a short distance away, and I could feel their gaze on me. Not just on me, through me. They could see everything I'd ever done, every thought I'd ever had, every mistake, every regret. I expected to feel ashamed, but instead all I felt was understanding, compassion, forgiveness. They didn't say anything, at least not with words. But somehow I could feel what they wanted me to know. They weren't here to judge me. They were here to help me, to guide me, to show me something I wasn't ready to see before. And just as I began to comprehend the enormity of what was happening, the figure stepped forward. I could see their face now, and that's when I realized. I couldn't look away from the figure approaching me, though every instinct I had told me to. There was something about it, him, that made me feel small in a way I can't quite explain. Not small as in insignificant, but small as in vulnerable, exposed. Like every secret, every lie, every horrible thing I'd ever done was laid bare in front of him, and he could see it all. As he came closer, I could make out more details. His face wasn't something I could describe in words, not really. It wasn't just features or a shape. It was what they carried. Kindness, strength, understanding. His presence felt like standing in the sun after years in the dark. It was warm, but not in a way that burned. It was a warmth that melted something inside me, something I didn't even know had frozen over. I didn't need to ask who he was. Somehow, I just knew. This was Jesus, the Jesus I'd heard about as a kid but had long since pushed out of my mind. The Jesus I used to think was for other people, better people, people who hadn't messed up their lives like I had. The closer he got, the heavier my shame became. I wanted to run, to hide, to disappear, but there was nowhere to go. Instead, I lowered my head, unable to meet his gaze. "I don't belong here," I said, barely above a whisper. My voice cracked, heavy with guilt. You must have the wrong person." He stopped a few steps away from me and didn't say anything right away. Instead, he just looked at me, and in that silence, something shifted. It wasn't judgment or disappointment in his eyes. It was love. Pure, unconditional love. The kind I'd spent my whole life chasing in all the wrong places. It was overwhelming. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, calm, and filled with a weight I can't describe. "Jake," he said, and hearing my name from him sent a shiver down my spine. "You're not here by mistake. You belong here more than you know." I shook my head, the words catching in my throat. "No, you don't understand. I've done things, horrible things. I've hurt people, lied, stolen. I'm not worth saving." He took another step closer, his expression soft but unwavering. "I do understand, Jake. I've seen it all, every moment of your life, every mistake, every regret, every tear, and I'm still here." The weight of his words hit me like a wave, and I felt tears streaming down my face before I even realized I was crying. Why? Why would you care about someone like me? He knelt down, bringing himself to my level, and for the first time I forced myself to meet his eyes. They were endless, filled with something I could only describe as eternity. "Because you are loved," he said simply. "You always have been, even when you couldn't see it, even when you didn't believe it." I didn't know what to say. All my life, I'd felt like love was something I had to earn, something I wasn't good enough to deserve. But here he was, telling me that wasn't true, that it never had been. He placed a hand on my shoulder, and it felt like every ounce of pain and guilt I'd been carrying melted away in an instant. "Jake, I'm not here to condemn you. I'm here to offer you something more, but the choice is yours." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "What do you mean? You've been living in chains, trapped by your own pain and choices, but you don't have to stay that way. You can let go of it all and start again." A lump formed in my throat. But how? How do I start again when I've already ruined everything? He smiled, a small but powerful smile that seemed to radiate hope. "By accepting what's been done for you, by believing that you are more than your mistakes. Jake, you have a purpose. Your story isn't over yet." I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in years, hope, real, unshakable hope. But with it came fear. What if I mess up again? What if I can't do it? His grip on my shoulder tightened, not in a way that hurt, but in a way that anchored me. "You're not alone in this. You never have to be. I'll walk with you, but you have to take the first step." I stared at him, overwhelmed by the weight of what he was saying. He was offering me a chance, a way out of the life I'd been trapped in, a chance to be free, to start over. But there was one thing I still didn't understand. "Why me?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Because you are my child," he said, his tone filled with a love that felt infinite, "and I never give up on my children." I closed my eyes, the tears flowing freely now. Part of me wanted to stay in that place forever, to hold on to the peace I felt in his presence. But something inside me knew what I had to do. I had to go back. I had to take that first step, no matter how terrifying it felt. "Jake," he said, his voice soft but firm, "it's not your time yet. Go back, live, and know that you are loved." The last thing I remember was his hand on my shoulder, a final wave of peace washing over me. Then, just as suddenly as I'd arrived, everything changed. The light, the warmth, the sound of his voice, it all faded, and I was falling back into the darkness, back to the world I thought I'd left behind. When I opened my eyes, I was still there, still in that impossible place, standing in front of Jesus. His presence radiated love, not just towards me, but as if it was woven into the air itself, saturating everything around us. I felt exposed under that love, not because it was harsh, but because it was so pure. It saw everything. Every thought I'd buried, every regret I'd tried to ignore, every failure I'd convinced myself defined me. It was all laid bare, and yet that love didn't waver. I stood there trembling, unsure if I even had the right to remain in front of him. The silence was heavy but not oppressive. It was the kind of silence that invited reflection, as though he was giving me space to process everything I'd just experienced. My mind, though, was racing in 1,000 different directions. "Why me?" I finally managed to say, my voice shaky and small. "Out of all the people in the world, why would you care about saving someone like me?" His eyes softened, and when he spoke, it felt like his words were aimed directly at the very core of my being. "Jake, I care about every single one of my children. You are no less valuable because of your mistakes. Your worth was never determined by your failures." I shook my head, overwhelmed. "But I've done things, terrible things. I've hurt people. I've ruined my life. I don't see how I can come back from that." He took a step closer, his expression full of understanding. "Jake, you're looking at yourself through the lens of shame and guilt. But that's not how I see you. When I look at you, I see someone who has struggled, yes, but I also see someone who has the strength to change, someone who has the capacity to love and to heal. You've been weighed down by the choices you've made, but I am here to tell you that you don't have to carry that weight anymore." His words hit me like a tidal wave. I felt the shame I'd been carrying my whole life bubbling to the surface. "But I don't deserve it," I whispered. "I don't deserve to be forgiven." He smiled gently, and it was the kind of smile that could break through the hardest heart. "Forgiveness isn't about what you deserve, Jake. It's a gift, freely given, and it's already yours if you're willing to accept it." I felt the tears start again, unstoppable. They weren't the kind of tears I was used to, the bitter, self-pitying tears I cried when I felt like the world was against me. These were different. They felt cleansing, like they were washing away something that had been festering inside me for years. "But how?" I asked, my voice cracking. "How do I even start to fix this? How do I move forward when I've already burned every bridge behind me?" "You start by letting go," he said, his voice steady and calm. "Let go of the guilt, the shame, the self-hatred. They've been chains around your heart, but they don't have to define you. I see your pain, Jake, and I know it's been heavy, but you don't have to carry it alone anymore." His words pierced me in a way I can't fully explain. I wanted to believe him, but I was scared. Scared of letting go. Scared of trusting that I could be anything more than the broken person I'd become. "But what if I fail again?" I asked. "What if I'm not strong enough?" "You will fail sometimes," he said, his honesty both comforting and terrifying. "But failure doesn't make you unworthy. What matters is that you keep trying, that you keep moving forward. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up every time you do." I nodded slowly, his words sinking in. I could feel something shifting inside me, like the chains he mentioned were starting to loosen, even if I wasn't sure how to let them go completely. "Jake," he continued, "you've been given this moment, this chance, for a reason. Your story isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning. You've been through the darkness, but now it's time to step into the light. Not just for yourself, but for others." I frowned, confused. "Others?" "There are people out there who need to hear your story," he said. "People who are where you've been, lost and struggling, feeling like there's no way out. You can be a light for them. You can show them that redemption is possible, that no one is too far gone." His words filled me with both hope and fear. Hope, because for the first time in years I felt like I had a purpose. Fear, because I didn't know if I could live up to it. Jesus must have seen the doubt in my eyes because he placed a hand on my shoulder, and in that moment, everything changed. I can't explain exactly what happened, but it was like a surge of warmth flooded through me. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual, even deeper than that. I felt something leave me, something heavy and dark, replaced by a sense of peace I'd never known. My body felt stronger, my mind clearer, my spirit lighter. "You are healed," he said simply, and I knew he didn't just mean my body. He meant all of it, my heart, my soul, my brokenness. It was as though he'd reached inside me and pulled out everything that had been weighing me down. I stood there, stunned, tears streaming down my face. "Thank you," I said, my voice trembling. "I don't know what else to say." "You don't need to say anything," he replied, "but you do need to act. Go back, Jake. Live the life you were meant to live. And remember, you are never alone. I will be with you every step of the way." His words resonated deep within me, and for the first time I felt ready to try, to hope, to live. "But what if I forget this feeling?" I asked. "What if I lose my way again?" "You might," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "But you will always find your way back, because my love for you will never fade. It's not your time yet. Go back and live." And with that, the light around him grew brighter, enveloping everything. I felt myself being pulled away, back toward the world I'd left behind. The last thing I saw was his face, radiant with love and compassion, and the last thing I heard was his voice, calm and steady. "You are loved." Then everything went dark. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I gasped for air like I had been underwater for far too long, my chest heaving as if my lungs had forgotten how to breathe. My eyes snapped open, and for a moment, all I could see was blinding light. It wasn't the warm, radiant light from before. This was harsh and fluorescent, stinging my eyes and pulling me back to a world I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Voices buzzed around me, panicked and disjointed. "He's breathing!" someone shouted. "Get the paramedics!" Another voice, softer, whispered, "How is this even possible?" I blinked, the shapes around me slowly coming into focus. I was lying on the floor of my apartment, the same grimy, suffocating space where everything had fallen apart. Except now, it didn't feel the same. The air felt lighter, the walls less suffocating. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was drowning. My body didn't ache the way it always had, and the heavy, relentless fog in my mind was gone. I tried to sit up, but my limbs felt foreign, like I was rediscovering how to use them. Someone, a neighbor maybe, knelt beside me, their face pale with shock. "Jake, are you okay?" I nodded slowly, my voice hoarse as I rasped out, "I think so." But even as I said it, I wasn't sure what okay meant anymore. Physically, I felt whole, but emotionally, mentally, I was in uncharted territory. As the adrenaline started to fade, my mind raced to piece together what had just happened. I remembered the darkness, the sense of falling, and then Jesus. His voice, his presence, his words, they were as clear as if he were still standing in front of me. I ran a shaky hand over my face, half expecting to wake up and realize it was all some bizarre dream. But it wasn't. I knew it wasn't. The paramedics arrived not long after, rushing into the room with equipment I didn't think I needed. They checked my vitals, shining lights in my eyes and peppering me with questions I barely processed. "Do you know where you are? What day it is? Can you tell us your name?" "My name's Jake," I said automatically, but the words felt strange in my mouth. I'd said my name 1,000 times before, but now it felt like I was introducing someone new, someone different. The paramedics exchanged glances, clearly confused by my calmness. One of them, a woman with kind eyes, asked, "Do you remember what happened?" I hesitated, unsure of how to explain. "I think I died." That brought the room to a standstill. The paramedics glanced at each other again, their expressions a mix of skepticism and concern. "You were unresponsive when we got the call," the woman said carefully. "We didn't think, well, it's a miracle you're even sitting up right now." A miracle. The word hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I wanted to tell her everything, to explain the light, the warmth, the voice that had reached into the darkest parts of me and pulled me back. But I stopped myself. How could I put something like that into words? How could I expect anyone to understand what I'd just been through when I barely understood it myself? Instead, I just nodded. "Yeah," I said quietly. "It is." They insisted on taking me to the hospital for further evaluation, and though I didn't feel like I needed it, I went along with it. During the ride, I stared out the window, watching the world rush by. Everything looked the same: gray skies, cracked sidewalks, people going about their lives. But it all felt different, brighter somehow, more alive. At the hospital, they ran a battery of tests, blood work, scans, the works. I sat there in silence, letting them poke and prod while my mind churned. I kept replaying everything that had happened, trying to make sense of it. Was it real? Had I really stood face to face with Jesus? Or had my brain, starved of oxygen, conjured it all as a last-ditch effort to comfort me before the end? But no matter how many times I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling deep in my chest, the certainty that it wasn't just some hallucination or trick of the mind. It was real. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name, and what's more, I knew I was different now. The guilt and shame that had been my constant companions were gone, replaced by something I could only describe as peace. The doctors came back eventually, their faces a mix of confusion and relief. "Your tests came back normal," one of them said. "In fact, they're better than normal. Your vitals are perfect, and there's no sign of any damage." I stared at him, unsure of how to respond. Of course, there was no damage. Jesus had healed me. But how could I explain that to them? I just nodded, murmuring, "Thank you," even though I knew the credit didn't belong to them or to me. They discharged me later that day, and as I stepped outside into the crisp air, I felt like I was seeing the world for the first time. The colors were sharper, the sounds clearer, the air fresher. Everything felt new, including me. As I walked back to my apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about what Jesus had said to me. "Your story isn't over." Those words echoed in my mind over and over, grounding me even as the enormity of what had happened threatened to overwhelm me. He'd given me a second chance, a fresh start. But what was I supposed to do with it? How was I supposed to live up to that kind of gift? I didn't have all the answers, not yet. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the questions. I wasn't afraid of what came next. Because no matter how uncertain the road ahead might be, I knew I wasn't walking it alone, and that was enough. For now, that was enough. When I woke up the next morning, it felt surreal. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. For years, my mind had been a storm, a constant noise of guilt, shame, and fear. But now, it was calm. Not empty, but still. The kind of stillness that made me feel like I could finally breathe. I sat up in bed, half expecting the peace I felt to have been a fluke. Maybe it was the adrenaline. Or maybe I'd wake up and find out nothing had changed. But as I sat there staring at the light streaming through the window, I realized it wasn't just my imagination. I was different. The weight I'd been carrying for so long was gone, and for the first time, I believed it wasn't coming back. I didn't know where to start. My apartment was a disaster, a reminder of everything I'd been through. The air felt heavy with the memories of every mistake I'd made within those walls. But instead of giving in to the familiar urge to avoid it, I did something I hadn't done in years. I cleaned. I picked up the empty bottles, the discarded wrappers, the broken furniture. It wasn't just about tidying up the space. It was about reclaiming it. Every piece of trash I threw away felt like shedding a part of my old self. But cleaning up my apartment was the easy part. The harder part was facing the mess I'd made in my life, the bridges I'd burned, the relationships I'd broken. I sat down with my phone, staring at the names of people I hadn't talked to in months, maybe even years. My mom, my sister, a few old friends. I didn't know what to say or if they'd even want to hear from me, but I knew I had to try. The first call I made was to my mom. As the phone rang, my chest tightened. What if she didn't answer? What if she answered and didn't want to talk to me? But when her voice came through the line, shaky and uncertain, all the words I'd been rehearsing disappeared. "Jake?" she said, and I could hear the mix of hope and hurt in her voice. "Mom," I said, my voice breaking. I'm sorry for everything." There was a pause, and for a moment I thought she might hang up. But then I heard her start to cry. "Jake, I've been praying for this moment every day. Are you okay? Are you really okay?" "I think so," I said honestly. "I don't know how to explain it, but something happened. I'm trying, Mom. I'm really trying this time." We talked for hours. She asked questions I couldn't fully answer, but she didn't push. She just listened. By the time we hung up, I felt lighter. Reaching out to her didn't fix everything, but it was a start. Over the next few weeks, I kept reaching out. To my sister, who had stopped answering my calls months ago because I only ever wanted something from her. To friends I'd lied to, manipulated, and let down. Some people didn't respond, and I couldn't blame them. But the ones who did, their responses were more forgiving than I ever thought I deserved. It wasn't easy, apologizing, owning up to everything I'd done, but it was necessary. Every conversation, every awkward moment of silence was a step toward rebuilding the connections I'd lost. At the same time, I knew I couldn't do this alone. I started going to meetings, something I'd resisted for years because I didn't think they'd help me. This time, though, it was different. I walked into that room, sat down in a circle of strangers, and for the first time, I told the truth. The whole truth. About my addiction, about how far I'd fallen, and about what had happened to me. I didn't expect anyone to believe me when I mentioned the part about Jesus, but no one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. They just nodded, like they understood. In those meetings, I found something I hadn't had in years. A community. People who didn't judge me, who knew what it was like to hit rock bottom and claw your way back up. People who reminded me that I wasn't alone, even when it felt like I was. But the biggest change wasn't in the meetings or the conversations. It was inside me. I started to feel free. Not just from the addiction, but from the person I used to be. The guilt and shame that had haunted me were still there, but they didn't control me anymore. Every day felt like a chance to start over, to do better than the day before. I started volunteering at a local shelter, not because anyone told me to, but because I felt like I needed to. I met people there who were struggling the way I had been, and for the first time, I realized I could actually help them. Not with big, grand gestures, but with small things. Listening, offering a kind word, sharing my story when it felt right. It wasn't much, but it mattered. One day, while I was helping serve dinner, a man about my age sat down across from me. His hands were trembling, and his eyes were bloodshot. He didn't say much at first, just stared at the plate of food like he wasn't sure he deserved it. I saw myself in him, lost, broken, and desperate for something he couldn't name. I didn't push him to talk, but eventually he opened up. He told me about his struggles, his mistakes, his regrets. When he finished, he looked at me and said, "I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can get better." I took a deep breath, remembering how many times I'd felt the same way. "You can," I said. "I know it feels impossible, but it's not. You're not as far gone as you think." He looked at me skeptical. "How do you know?" "Because I've been there," I said simply. "I thought I was too far gone too, but I'm standing here now talking to you, and I'm telling you it's possible." He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes changed. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but I recognized it because I'd felt it myself not so long ago. Hope. Every day since I came back has been a reminder of the second chance I've been given. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time, I'm not afraid of it. My story isn't over, and now I'm determined to make the rest of it count. I never thought I'd be standing here sharing my story with anyone. For most of my life, I kept everything bottled up. The pain, the shame, the mistakes. I thought if people knew the truth about me, they'd walk away, just like so many had before. But now, I know the power of telling the truth. It's not just about being honest with others. It's about being honest with yourself. And that's where healing starts. When I think back to the moment everything changed, it still feels surreal. I remember lying on that cold floor, feeling like my life was over. And in a way, it was. That version of me, the one who lived in chains, trapped by addiction and fear, did die. But what came next? That was something I could never have imagined. Meeting Jesus, feeling his presence, hearing his words, that wasn't just a moment, it was a transformation. He gave me something I never thought I'd have again. Hope. Hope is a funny thing. When you're at your lowest, it feels like a foreign concept, something meant for other people, not you. I spent years convinced I didn't deserve it. I thought my mistakes were too big, my failures too many. But what I've learned is that hope isn't about deserving. It's about accepting. Accepting that your story isn't over, even when it feels like it is. Accepting that no matter how far you've fallen, there's a way back. I used to think miracles were just stories people told to make themselves feel better. But I'm standing here today because of a miracle. Not just the miracle of being brought back to life, though that's part of it. The real miracle is what's happened since then. The way my heart has changed. The way I've been able to rebuild relationships I thought were lost forever. The way I've found purpose in helping others. Those are miracles too, and they're just as powerful. When I share my story now, it's not about me. It's about what's possible. It's about showing people that no matter how far gone you think you are, you're never beyond the reach of grace. I've met people who are still in the darkness I used to live in, and I see the same hopelessness in their eyes that I used to feel. But when I tell them what happened to me, when I tell them about the love and forgiveness I experienced, I see something else. A spark. A glimmer of belief that maybe, just maybe, they can find their way out too. I won't lie and say it's been easy. There are still days when the weight of my past tries to creep back in, when the voice in my head whispers that I'm not good enough. But now, I have something stronger than that voice. I have the memory of what Jesus said to me. You are loved. Those words are my anchor, my reminder that no matter how hard things get, I'm not alone. So if you're watching this and you feel like you're too far gone, like you've made too many mistakes to ever come back, I want you to hear me. You're not. I've been there. I've felt the crushing weight of shame and the emptiness of thinking there's no way out. But I'm here to tell you there is. There's always a way. It might not look the way you expect, and it might not happen overnight, but it's there. Sometimes, all it takes is one step, one phone call, one prayer, one moment of honesty with yourself. And if you're willing to take that step, you might find that the help you need is closer than you think. Maybe it's in a friend, a family member, a community, or maybe it's in something bigger, something you can't see but can feel if you're open to it. The biggest thing I've learned is that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about transforming it. The things I used to think were my greatest failures have become the foundation for something new. My struggles, my mistakes. They're still part of my story, but they don't define it anymore. Instead, they've become the reason I'm able to connect with others, to offer them a hand when they're feeling lost. If you're struggling right now, I want you to know that your story isn't over. You have so much more ahead of you, even if you can't see it yet. And if you found your way out of the darkness, don't keep it to yourself. Share your story. You never know who might need to hear it. Before I wrap this up, I want to leave you with this. You are not alone. No matter how isolated you feel, no matter how heavy the weight on your shoulders, there is hope. There is love. And there is grace waiting for you if you're willing to accept it. Thank you for listening to my story. If it's touched you, if it's made you think, I hope you'll share it. Not for me, but for the people out there who might need to hear it. And if you're ready to take that first step toward healing, know that you don't have to do it alone. There's help out there, and there's a future waiting for you. You just have to believe it's possible. Your story isn't over, it's just beginning.